Most people spend their lives wishing for better results, hoping for better circumstances, and praying for better opportunities. Yet very few make the one decision that changes everything, the decision to raise their standards. They want a better income, but they tolerate poor habits. They want better health, but they accept neglect. They want more respect, yet they settle for less than they deserve. And here is the truth that changes lives. Life does not rise to your hopes. It falls to your standards. The moment you decide what you will no longer tolerate, everything begins to shift. Not tomorrow, not next year. The moment you make that internal decision, because standards are not what you say you want. Standards are what you accept. They are revealed in what you allow, what you excuse, and what you repeat. You don't get paid for your intentions. You get paid for your discipline. If you want more, you must become more. And becoming more starts with demanding more of yourself. Not in anger, not in frustration, but in maturity. A mature individual says, I can do better, and therefore I must. They understand that success is not something you pursue. It is something you attract by the person you decide to become. Raising your standards is not about perfection. It is about progression. It is about refusing to live below your potential. It is about deciding that average is no longer acceptable, that excuses are no longer valid, and that growth is no longer optional. When you raise your standards, your behavior rises to meet them. Your habits align, your confidence strengthens, and suddenly the life that once seemed out of reach begins to respond. Because the greatest day in your life is not the day you receive a reward. It is the day you decide to change the rules you live by. Personal standards determine the direction and quality of life because every outcome you experience is first filtered through what you expect of yourself. Long before results show up in your bank account, your health, your relationships, or your sense of fulfillment, they are shaped quietly by the inner rules you live by. These rules are rarely written down, yet they operate with absolute authority. They dictate how early you wake up, how seriously you prepare, how consistently you follow through, and how quickly you allow yourself to quit when things become uncomfortable. A person may claim to want success, growth, or freedom, but their real destination is already set by the standards they keep, not by the goals they announce. Standards act like a thermostat for life. If the setting is low, no amount of wishing will raise the temperature. You can read books, attend seminars, and surround yourself with ambition. But if your internal standard says, this is good enough, then that is where your life will stabilize. When effort drops, standards pull it back down. When discipline weakens, standards decide what level you return to. This is why two people can have the same opportunities, the same resources, and even the same talents, yet end up living vastly different lives. One refuses to tolerate mediocrity in thought and action, while the other quietly accepts it as normal. Personal standards influence decisions in moments when no one is watching. They determine whether you do the small disciplines that feel insignificant but compound over time. They decide whether you speak with integrity when dishonesty would be easier, whether you prepare thoroughly when shortcuts are available, and whether you hold yourself accountable when excuses are readily available. Life rewards these invisible decisions. Over time, they accumulate into visible results. What looks like luck or talent from the outside is often nothing more than a higher internal demand, consistently honored over years. The quality of life you experience is not an accident, nor is it a mystery. It is a reflection of what you believe you deserve and what you are willing to require of yourself. If your standard for effort is low, frustration becomes normal. If your standard for growth is low, stagnation becomes comfortable. If your standard for responsibility is low, blame becomes a habit. Conversely, when standards rise, everything else must follow. Better standards force better thinking. Better thinking leads to better choices. Better choices produce better habits. And better habits inevitably shape a better life. Many people try to change their lives by changing circumstances, not realizing that circumstances are temporary, but standards are permanent until consciously raised. They wait for motivation, inspiration, or confidence to appear, yet those qualities are not prerequisites for higher standards. They are products of them. Confidence grows when you consistently meet higher expectations of yourself. Motivation strengthens when your actions align with a clear internal code. Discipline becomes easier when your standard no longer allows negotiation with weakness. Raising personal standards is not about pressure or punishment. It is about self-respect. It is a quiet declaration that your life matters enough to demand more from yourself than you did yesterday. It is choosing long-term fulfillment over short-term comfort, progress over excuses, and responsibility over entitlement. When standards rise, life responds not because the world changes, but because you do, and from that point forward, the direction and quality of your life can only move upward. As long as those standards remain non-negotiable, life improves only when expectations of self improve. Because the primary limitation in most lives is not circumstance, economy, or opportunity, but the level of demand individuals place upon themselves. Many people spend years expecting more from the world than they do from their own effort, discipline, and character. They hope conditions will change, that someone will notice their potential, or that luck will eventually turn in their favor. Yet progress rarely comes from outside pressure. It emerges when a person quietly decides that the current version of themselves is no longer sufficient for the life they desire. Self-expectations shape behavior long before results appear. When expectations are low, minimal effort feels justified, inconsistency feels excusable, and underperformance feels acceptable. A person may say they want growth, but if they expect little of themselves, they will unconsciously design a life that delivers little. When expectations rise, behavior must adjust to meet them. You begin to show up earlier, prepare more thoroughly, speak more carefully, and act more deliberately. These changes are not dramatic in the moment, but over time they transform the entire trajectory of life. Improvement does not respond to comfort. It responds to challenge. When you raise expectations of yourself, you introduce a healthy tension between where you are and where you know you should be. That tension is productive. It forces learning, adaptation, and self-correction. Without it, complacency settles in and potential remains dormant. Many people confuse self-acceptance with self-neglect. Accepting who you are does not mean settling for who you will remain. Growth requires the humility to admit that more is possible and the courage to require it of yourself. Expectations of self influence how you interpret setbacks. With low expectations, Obstacles become reasons to stop. With higher expectations, obstacles become signals to adjust and persist. When you expect yourself to be disciplined, you do not collapse at the first sign of difficulty. When you expect yourself to grow, you view mistakes as feedback rather than failure. Life begins to improve not because challenges disappear, but because your response to them becomes stronger, calmer, and more intentional. Raising self-expectations also changes identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who follows through, someone who honors commitments, and someone who refuses to live beneath their capability. Identity drives consistency. Once you expect yourself to act at a higher level, acting otherwise creates internal discomfort. That discomfort becomes a guide, steering you back toward better choices. Over time, what once required effort becomes standard behavior, and what once felt difficult becomes normal. Many people wait for external validation before raising their expectations, but improvement requires internal leadership. No one will monitor your habits, protect your time, or demand excellence from you with the same consistency that you can. When you decide to expect more of yourself, you take control of the only factor you truly own. This shift creates momentum. As your actions improve, your confidence grows. As confidence grows, your willingness to stretch increases. As you stretch, new capabilities emerge. Life does not improve in one dramatic leap. It improves in quiet increments, driven by higher expectations honored daily. Better conversations, better preparation, better follow through, and better use of time accumulate into better outcomes. The world responds differently to someone who carries themselves with self-respect and discipline, but that response is secondary. The primary reward of raising expectations is becoming someone you trust, someone you respect, and someone capable of building a life that reflects the standards you now live by. Discipline begins where excuses end, because progress is impossible when energy is constantly spent justifying inaction. Excuses may sound reasonable, logical, and even responsible on the surface, but they quietly erode personal power. Each excuse transfers control away from the individual and hands it over to circumstances, emotions, or other people. The moment a person allows excuses to dominate their thinking, discipline has no space to operate. Discipline is not a feeling or a personality trait. It is a decision to act regardless of comfort, mood, or external conditions. Excuses thrive in environments of low standards. When standards are weak, excuses feel acceptable and even necessary. People tell themselves they are too tired, too busy, too stressed, or not ready yet, without realizing that these explanations are rarely temporary. They become habits of thought. Over time, the mind becomes trained to search for reasons not to act rather than reasons to follow through. Discipline cannot coexist with this mindset because discipline requires ownership, and excuses are an attempt to avoid responsibility without openly rejecting it. The difference between disciplined individuals and undisciplined ones is not that one group faces fewer obstacles. It is that disciplined individuals have decided that obstacles do not qualify as exemptions. They understand that life will never present ideal conditions, and that waiting for them is a subtle form of procrastination. When excuses are removed, action becomes the default response. You stop debating whether to do what needs to be done and begin doing it as a matter of personal policy. Ending excuses requires honesty. Many people are not truly limited by their circumstances, but by the stories they tell themselves about those circumstances. Discipline starts when you replace justification with accountability. Instead of asking whether you feel like doing something, you ask whether it needs to be done. This shift may seem small, but it radically alters behavior. Feelings fluctuate. Commitments remain. Discipline is built on honoring commitments, especially when feelings are absent. Excuses also distort time. They convince people that tomorrow will be easier, that motivation will arrive later, and that conditions will improve on their own. Discipline recognizes that tomorrow is shaped by what is done today. When excuses end, time becomes valuable. You stop wasting it on hesitation and start investing it in progress. Even imperfect action becomes preferable to perfect planning that never leads anywhere. Removing excuses does not mean ignoring reality or denying difficulty. It means refusing to use difficulty as a reason to disengage. Discipline allows for fatigue, fear, and uncertainty, but it does not allow them to dictate behavior. When excuses are eliminated, discipline fills the gap by providing structure. Routines replace guesswork. Habits replace willpower. Over time, what once required effort becomes automatic because the option to avoid action has been removed. A disciplined life is not rigid or joyless. It is free. Freedom comes from knowing you can rely on yourself. When excuses end, self-trust grows. You begin to see yourself as someone who does what they say they will do, regardless of inconvenience. That identity strengthens confidence and reduces internal conflict. Instead of negotiating with yourself daily, you operate from clear principles. Discipline is not built in a single decision, but in repeated moments where excuses are rejected. Each time you choose action over explanation, you reinforce a pattern. That pattern becomes character. Character shapes destiny. When excuses are no longer entertained, discipline becomes the natural response, and progress becomes inevitable because nothing stands between intention and action anymore. Standards influence daily decisions, not future wishes, because life is ultimately lived in moments, not in intentions. Many people are deeply attached to what they hope will happen someday, yet they rarely examine what they are choosing today. Wishes live in the future, but standards operate in the present. They quietly govern the smallest decisions that seem insignificant in isolation, but are powerful when repeated. What you eat, what you read, how you speak, what you tolerate, and how you use the first and last hour of your day are all dictated by your standards, not by your long-term dreams. A person may wish for success, health, or freedom, but wishes require no discipline. Standards, on the other hand, require consistency. They show up when no one is watching and when results are not immediate. This is why two people with identical goals often experience completely different outcomes. One lives by standards that shape behavior daily, while the other lives by wishes that remain abstract and disconnected from action. Standards remove ambiguity. They answer questions before they arise. When a decision point appears, a clear standard eliminates debate. Daily decisions are where character is formed. Each choice reinforces a pattern, and each pattern strengthens an identity. Standards determine whether you choose what is easy or what is necessary. Without standards, decisions are driven by emotion, convenience, and short-term relief. With standards, decisions are guided by principle and long-term alignment. You do not have to feel motivated to act when standards are clear. You act because it is who you have decided to be. Future wishes often create the illusion of progress. People talk about what they will do when the time is right, when conditions improve, or when they feel more confident. Standards bring the focus back to what must be done now. They expose the gap between desire and discipline. That gap is where growth either begins or dies. When standards are low, the gap is ignored. When standards are high, the gap becomes unacceptable, and action follows. Standards also protect you from decision fatigue. When expectations are vague, every choice becomes a negotiation. You argue with yourself, rationalize shortcuts, and delay action. This drains energy and weakens resolve. Clear standards simplify life. They turn choices into policies. Instead of asking whether you should do the work, you recognize that doing the work is the standard. Instead of questioning whether to maintain integrity, you understand that integrity is non-negotiable. This clarity creates momentum. Daily decisions compound. One disciplined choice may not change much, but repeated daily, it reshapes direction. Standards ensure that these choices align with the life you want rather than the comfort you seek. They prevent you from trading long-term fulfillment for short-term pleasure. Over time, the accumulation of disciplined decisions produces results that appear extraordinary, but are built on ordinary consistency. Many people underestimate the power of standards because they are invisible. No one applauds the daily decision to prepare, to practice, or to persist. Yet these decisions determine the ceiling of achievement. Wishes may inspire, but standards sustain. When motivation fades, standards remain. They hold you accountable to the person you intend to become, not the person you feel like being in the moment. Rising standards is not about becoming rigid or extreme. It is about aligning daily behavior with future vision. When standards guide daily decisions, the future no longer depends on hope. It becomes a predictable outcome of consistent action, repeated with purpose, guided by principles that are honored every day. Without exception, you cannot outperform the level you tolerate because tolerance sets the upper limit of behavior, performance, and results. Whatever you allow to remain in your life, whether it is poor habits, negative thinking, lack of preparation, or inconsistent effort, becomes a silent agreement with mediocrity. Tolerance is not neutral. It actively shapes outcomes by signaling what is acceptable. When you tolerate low standards, they become normalized, and once normalized, they define your baseline. No amount of ambition can overcome a baseline that has been quietly set too low. Many people work hard in short bursts, but fail to progress because they tolerate behaviors that cancel their effort. They may tolerate distractions that steal focus, relationships that drain energy, or routines that undermine discipline. These tolerated conditions erode performance from within. You cannot rise above what you repeatedly permit. Excellence requires alignment, and tolerance of misalignment keeps performance capped. A person cannot expect exceptional results while allowing average behaviors to dominate their daily life. Tolerance often disguises itself as patience, flexibility, or realism. While these qualities have value, when misapplied, they become excuses for avoiding necessary change. There is a difference between understanding limitations and accepting them as permanent. Growth begins the moment you decide that certain behaviors, thoughts, and conditions are no longer acceptable. Until that decision is made, effort will be diluted. Energy will be divided between moving forward and maintaining what should have been left behind. The most dangerous tolerances are internal. Self-doubt, negative self-talk, and complacency quietly sabotage performance long before external obstacles appear. When you tolerate these internal patterns, they influence how much effort you apply, how long you persist, and how confidently you act. Performance is as much mental as it is physical. You cannot outperform a mindset that constantly negotiates with weakness. Raising performance requires drawing a firm line between what is acceptable and what is not. Tolerance also affects identity. What you tolerate repeatedly becomes part of how you see yourself. If you tolerate inconsistency, you begin to identify as someone who is unreliable. If you tolerate under-preparation, you begin to expect mediocre outcomes. Identity shapes behavior, and behavior reinforces identity. This cycle keeps performance locked within the boundaries of tolerance. Breaking the cycle requires intolerance for behaviors that do not serve your growth. High performers are not immune to discomfort or failure. What distinguishes them is what they refuse to tolerate. They do not tolerate excuses, missed commitments, or repeated neglect of fundamentals. This intolerance creates pressure, but it is constructive pressure. It forces improvement. It demands adjustment. It pushes capability upward. Without this pressure, performance stagnates, regardless of talent or opportunity. Tolerance determines environment as well. The standards you allow influence the people you surround yourself with, the conversations you engage in, and the expectations others place on you. When you tolerate low standards, you attract environments that reinforce them. When you raise intolerance for mediocrity, your environment must adjust or be replaced. This shift is often uncomfortable, but it is necessary for sustained growth. Outperforming requires discipline, focus, and resilience, but none of these can function in an environment of low tolerance. When you decide what you will no longer accept, performance has room to rise. You stop leaking energy into maintaining behaviors that hold you back. Effort becomes more effective. Progress accelerates. Results begin to reflect potential rather than compromise, because performance can only rise to the level allowed by the standards you enforce in your life every single day. Raising standards requires honesty and responsibility, because meaningful change cannot occur without an accurate assessment of where you truly are and a willingness to own the results you are producing. Many people want higher standards, but they want them without discomfort, without self-examination, and without accountability. They prefer to believe that circumstances are the primary obstacle rather than confronting the reality that their current standards have created their current outcomes. Without self-honesty, standards become aspirations rather than rules, and aspirations are easily ignored. Self-honesty demands that you look at your habits, decisions, and patterns without justification or self-deception. It requires admitting when effort has been inconsistent, when discipline has been lacking, and when comfort has been prioritized over growth. This process can be uncomfortable because it removes the protective layer of excuses. However, that discomfort is productive. It reveals leverage points where change can occur. Until you are honest about what you are tolerating, you cannot decide what needs to change. Responsibility follows self-honesty. Once you acknowledge that your actions have contributed to your current situation. You gain power. Responsibility is often misunderstood as blame, but it is the opposite. Blame looks backward and weakens action. Responsibility looks forward and strengthens it. When you take responsibility, you accept that regardless of how things became the way they are, improvement depends on what you choose to do next. This mindset shifts focus from what should have happened to what must happen now. Rising standards without responsibility leads to frustration. You may recognize the need for change, but without ownership, you wait for external forces to initiate it. Responsibility eliminates waiting. It creates urgency. You begin to act because you understand that no one else will enforce your standards for you. This realization can be sobering, but it is also liberating. You stop expecting motivation to appear and start creating structure that supports higher behavior. Self-honesty also protects against unrealistic standards. When you understand your current capacity and limitations, you can raise standards incrementally and sustainably. This avoids cycles of overcommitment followed by burnout and withdrawal. Honest evaluation allows you to set standards that stretch you without breaking you. Responsibility ensures that once those standards are set, they are honored consistently. Many people resist responsibility because it removes the comfort of victimhood. As long as circumstances are blamed, standards can remain low without guilt. Responsibility removes that option. It places the outcome back where it belongs, in your hands. This is not a burden. It is an opportunity. When you accept responsibility, every choice becomes meaningful. Every improvement, no matter how small, becomes evidence of growth. Rising standards also requires honesty about identity. You must confront the gap between who you believe you are and how you consistently act. This gap is where standards either rise or remain stagnant. Responsibility bridges this gap. It aligns behavior with values. When actions reflect stated principles, self-respect increases. That self-respect reinforces higher standards, creating a positive cycle of growth. Self-honesty and responsibility are ongoing practices, not one-time events. As standards rise, new weaknesses are revealed. New adjustments are required. This process never ends, but it becomes easier as discipline strengthens. Over time, you begin to trust yourself because you know you will confront reality rather than avoid it. You know you will take ownership rather than make excuses. A life guided by higher standards is built on clarity and commitment. Clarity comes from self-honesty. Commitment comes from responsibility. Together, they form the foundation for sustained improvement. Without them, standards remain theoretical. With them, standards become lived principles that shape decisions, habits, and identity, ensuring that growth is intentional, measurable, and driven from within rather than dependent on external pressure or circumstance. Success responds to commitment, not convenience, because meaningful achievement demands consistency in moments when ease and comfort would suggest stopping or delaying. Convenience appeals to the desire for immediate relief, minimal effort, and short-term satisfaction. Commitment appeals to purpose, discipline, and long-term vision. The difference between those who make progress and those who remain stuck is not intelligence or opportunity, but the willingness to honor commitments, even when doing so is inconvenient. Convenience creates a pattern of selective effort. People act only when conditions feel favorable, when energy is high, or when motivation is present. This approach produces unpredictable results because it relies on variables that fluctuate daily. Commitment removes this uncertainty. When you are committed, action is not negotiated based on how you feel. It is executed because it aligns with a decision already made. This consistency is what success recognizes and rewards over time. Commitment requires sacrifice, particularly of comfort. It asks you to do what is necessary instead of what is easy. This might mean working when others rest, preparing when others procrastinate, or persisting when progress appears slow. These actions rarely feel convenient in the moment, but they compound into significant advantages. Success is built in these inconvenient moments, not in periods of enthusiasm or ideal conditions. Many people misunderstand commitment as intensity rather than consistency. They exert strong effort briefly and then withdraw when discomfort arises. True commitment is quieter. It shows up repeatedly without drama or external validation. It is the discipline to follow through on small actions day after day. Success responds to this pattern because it reflects reliability, resilience, and respect for the process. Convenience often disguises itself as efficiency or balance, but when overused, it becomes avoidance. Choosing convenience repeatedly trains the mind to prioritize comfort over growth. Over time, this erodes confidence and weakens self-trust. When you break commitments to yourself for the sake of convenience, you reinforce the belief that your goals are optional. Commitment, on the other hand, strengthens identity. Each time you honor a commitment despite inconvenience, you build trust in yourself. Success demands preparation long before rewards are visible. Commitment ensures that preparation occurs regardless of immediate payoff. This creates readiness. When opportunities arise, committed individuals are prepared to act. Those who relied on convenience often find themselves unprepared despite having similar aspirations. Success favors readiness, not intention. Commitment also shapes resilience. When challenges arise, committed individuals adjust rather than abandon. They view obstacles as part of the process rather than signals to stop. Convenience interprets difficulty as a reason to disengage. Commitment interprets difficulty as a reason to persist or adapt. This difference in interpretation determines outcomes over time. The world does not reward convenience because convenience produces inconsistency. Success, whether in personal development, business, or relationships, requires dependability. Commitment demonstrates dependability. It shows that you can be counted on to deliver, to grow, and to endure. This reputation attracts opportunities and trust, both of which are essential for sustained success. Commitment must be renewed daily. It is not a single promise, but a series of choices. Each choice either honors or undermines the commitment. Over time, these choices shape character. Character influences capability. Capability determines results. When commitment is prioritized over convenience, actions align with long-term objectives rather than short-term comfort. Success does not respond to wishful thinking or occasional effort. It responds to the steady, disciplined execution of commitments made in advance and honored regardless of convenience. When commitment becomes the standard, success becomes a predictable outcome rather than a distant hope, because every inconvenient action moves you closer to the life you have decided to build rather than the life that is merely easy to live. Success responds to commitment, not convenience, because meaningful achievement is never built on what feels easy in the moment. Convenience appeals to comfort, speed, and immediate relief, while commitment appeals to purpose, discipline, and long-term direction. The two are rarely aligned. When convenience leads, progress becomes inconsistent. When commitment leads, progress becomes inevitable. Success recognizes patterns, not intentions. And the strongest pattern it responds to is sustained commitment. Convenience encourages selective effort. People act when conditions are favorable, when motivation is high, or when the task feels manageable. This approach creates inconsistency because feelings change, energy fluctuates, and circumstances are rarely ideal. Commitment removes this instability. Once a commitment is made, action is no longer dependent on mood or comfort. It becomes a matter of personal integrity. This reliability is what separates those who move forward from those who remain stuck in cycles of starting and stopping. Commitment requires sacrifice, especially of comfort and ease. It demands that you do what is necessary rather than what is pleasant. This often means early mornings, disciplined routines, delayed gratification, and continued effort when results are not yet visible. These moments are inconvenient by nature, yet they are the exact moments where growth is formed. Success is built quietly during these periods, not during moments of excitement or inspiration. Many people confuse commitment with intensity. They work hard for a short period and expect results to follow quickly. When progress slows, convenience becomes tempting and effort fades. True commitment is not dramatic. It is steady. It shows up daily, performing small actions with consistency. This steady execution compounds over time, creating results that appear impressive, but are rooted in ordinary discipline. Convenience often disguises itself as balance or efficiency, but repeated reliance on convenience weakens self-trust. Each time you choose what is easy over what is necessary, you subtly communicate to yourself that your goals are negotiable. Commitment sends the opposite message. It reinforces identity. When you consistently honor commitments, you begin to see yourself as reliable, disciplined, and capable. This self-image strengthens resolve and increases confidence. Success also favors preparedness. Commitment ensures preparation continues even when no immediate reward is present. While others wait for the right moment, committed individuals build skill, knowledge, and resilience. When opportunity appears, they are ready. Convenience leaves people unprepared because preparation is often inconvenient and lacks instant payoff. Commitment strengthens resilience. When difficulties arise, convenience looks for escape. Commitment looks for adjustment. Instead of quitting, committed individuals refine their approach and continue forward. This adaptability keeps momentum alive. Success responds to this persistence because it reflects maturity and endurance. The world does not reward convenience because convenience produces unpredictability. Success requires dependability. Commitment demonstrates dependability over time. It signals that you can be trusted to follow through, to endure pressure, and to improve consistently. This trust attracts opportunity, responsibility, and respect. Commitment is not a single promise made once. It is a decision renewed daily. Each day presents a choice between ease and execution. Over time, these choices form character. Character shapes capability. Capability determines outcomes. When commitment consistently outweighs convenience, success is no longer accidental or distant. It becomes a natural result of disciplined choices made repeatedly in moments when convenience would have been easier, but commitment was chosen. Instead, growth demands discomfort before reward because meaningful improvement requires leaving familiar patterns that feel safe but produce limited results. Comfort preserves the status quo. Discomfort challenges it. Every new level of capability, confidence, and achievement is preceded by a period of unease where effort feels awkward, progress feels slow, and certainty feels absent. This phase is unavoidable. Those who misunderstand it often retreat just as growth begins to take shape. Discomfort is not a signal that something is wrong. It is evidence that something is changing. When you stretch beyond current limits, the mind and body resist because they are designed to conserve energy and avoid risk. This resistance is natural. The mistake is interpreting resistance as a reason to stop rather than as confirmation that expansion is occurring. Growth requires repetition in this uncomfortable space until new behaviors become familiar and new standards become normal. Many people seek reward first and growth second. They want confidence before action, clarity before commitment, and success before effort. Growth operates in the opposite order. Action precedes confidence. Commitment precedes clarity. Effort precedes results. Discomfort is the price of admission for progress. Those unwilling to pay it remain dependent on motivation and external validation, both of which are unreliable. Discomfort also reveals weaknesses that comfort hides. When you operate within familiar limits, deficiencies remain unnoticed. When you push beyond them, gaps in skill, discipline, and mindset become visible. These gaps are not failures. They are feedback. Growth accelerates when discomfort is used as information rather than as a reason for self-judgment. Each moment of strain points to an area where strength can be developed. The reward that follows discomfort is not immediate gratification. It is capability. Capability produces confidence, resilience, and self-respect. These rewards are delayed but durable. They do not disappear when circumstances change. They remain because they are earned through effort. Comfort offers quick relief, but no lasting return. Discomfort offers long-term return, but requires patience and trust in the process. Many people abandon growth because discomfort challenges identity. It confronts the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you can handle. Staying in discomfort long enough to adapt requires humility and persistence. It requires accepting that mastery feels like incompetence in the early stages. Those who endure this phase gain skills and perspective that others never develop. Discomfort also strengthens discipline. When you repeatedly choose action despite unease, you train yourself to operate independently of mood. This skill is invaluable. It allows progress to continue even when enthusiasm fades. Over time, what once felt uncomfortable becomes manageable, then normal. At that point, growth requires a new level of discomfort. This cycle continues as long as development continues. Reward becomes meaningful because it is earned. The satisfaction that follows sustained effort is deeper than pleasure derived from ease. It is rooted in self-trust. You know you can endure difficulty and emerge stronger. This knowledge changes how you approach future challenges. Fear loses influence because experience has proven that discomfort is temporary and survivable. Growth does not negotiate with comfort. It requires movement into uncertainty and effort without immediate reassurance. Those who understand this relationship stop avoiding discomfort and start using it as a guide. They recognize that every meaningful reward they seek is on the other side of a period of strain, discipline, and persistence. And they choose to move forward anyway, knowing that the discomfort they feel today is the foundation for the strength, capability, and fulfillment they will experience tomorrow. Identity must rise before results change, because external outcomes are always downstream from internal self-perception. People do not consistently act beyond who they believe they are. Behavior follows identity, not the other way around. Temporary effort may produce short-term improvement, but lasting results require a shift in how you see yourself. Until identity changes, behavior will eventually revert to familiar patterns, and results will return to previous levels. Many people attempt to change results by forcing new habits without addressing identity. They try to work harder, act more confident, or stay disciplined. But when pressure increases or motivation fades, old behaviors resurface. This happens because the underlying identity has not evolved. The mind seeks alignment. When actions conflict with self-image, the tension becomes uncomfortable, and the mind resolves it by abandoning the behavior rather than redefining identity. Sustainable change occurs only when identity expands to support higher standards. Identity is shaped by repeated actions and the meaning you assign to them. When you consistently act with discipline, integrity, and effort, and recognize those actions as evidence of who you are becoming, identity begins to shift. You no longer say you are trying to be disciplined. You see yourself as a disciplined person. This distinction is critical. A person who sees discipline as part of their identity does not negotiate with excuses. They act in alignment with who they believe they are. Results change when actions become automatic. Automatic behavior is driven by identity. You do not deliberate over actions that align with your self-image. You simply do them. A person who identifies as reliable follows through. A person who identifies as prepared plans ahead. A person who identifies as resilient persists through difficulty. When identity rises, these behaviors become natural rather than forced. Identity also influences how you interpret feedback and setbacks. With a limited identity, setbacks feel personal and discouraging. With an expanded identity, setbacks are viewed as information and opportunity for growth. This perspective allows learning rather than withdrawal. Results improve because persistence increases. The ability to remain engaged during difficulty is a function of identity, not willpower. Rising identity requires conscious choice. You must decide what kind of person you are becoming and begin acting in alignment with that decision even before evidence appears. This requires faith in process and patience with progress. Each aligned action reinforces identity. Over time, evidence accumulates, strengthening belief and stabilizing behavior. Many people wait for results before granting themselves a higher identity. They say they will feel confident once they succeed or disciplined once they see progress. This logic is reversed. Identity must lead. When you adopt the identity first, behavior follows and results eventually confirm it. This sequence is uncomfortable because it requires acting without external validation. However, it is the only sequence that produces lasting change. Identity also governs tolerance. When identity rises, tolerance for behaviors that contradict it decreases. You no longer accept inconsistency, because it conflicts with who you believe you are. This internal pressure is constructive. It maintains standards without constant self-monitoring. Growth becomes self-regulating. The most powerful changes in life are not visible at first. They occur internally. When identity evolves, results are inevitable. External circumstances respond to internal alignment. Opportunities appear because behavior changes. Relationships improve because boundaries strengthen. Performance increases because effort becomes consistent. When identity rises, you stop chasing outcomes and start embodying the qualities that produce them. Results become a reflection rather than a pursuit. This internal shift is subtle but decisive. Until identity changes, results remain unstable. When identity changes, results follow naturally because you no longer act in pursuit of success. You act from a version of yourself that expects it, supports it, and sustains it through consistent action over time. A better life starts with better demands of self because improvement is never the result of wishing, hoping, or waiting for conditions to change. It begins when an individual decides to raise the level of expectation they place on their own thinking, behavior, and follow through. External circumstances may influence progress, but they do not determine it. The determining factor is always the internal standard that governs what effort is applied, what habits are maintained, and what behaviors are no longer acceptable. Most people demand more from their environment than from themselves. They expect better treatment, better opportunities, better outcomes, yet they continue to operate with the same routines, the same excuses, and the same level of preparation. This imbalance creates frustration. When demands of self remain low, results cannot rise regardless of desire. Raising demands of self restores balance. It shifts focus from what should happen to what must be done. Better demands of self create clarity. When expectations are vague, effort becomes inconsistent. When expectations are specific, action becomes focused. Demanding more of yourself does not mean self-criticism or harsh judgment. It means self-respect. It means recognizing your capacity for growth and refusing to waste it. This form of demand is constructive. It challenges without condemning. It pushes without breaking. Demands of self-influence discipline. When you expect more of yourself, you no longer wait for motivation to appear. You act because the standard requires it. This reduces internal conflict. Decisions become simpler. Instead of asking whether you should do something, you recognize that doing it is part of who you are choosing to become. This alignment between expectation and behavior creates momentum. Rising self-demands also strengthens accountability. You stop measuring progress by comparison with others and start measuring it by consistency with your own standards. This internal accountability is more powerful than external pressure because it is constant. You cannot escape it or negotiate with it. Each day becomes an opportunity to meet or miss the demands you have set. Over time, meeting them builds confidence and self-trust. Better demands of self require courage because they eliminate comfortable excuses. You can no longer blame circumstances, timing, or other people for lack of progress. Responsibility becomes unavoidable. This can feel heavy at first, but it is also empowering. When you accept responsibility, you regain control. Progress becomes possible because it is no longer dependent on factors outside your influence. Demanding more of yourself also reshapes priorities. Time is used more deliberately. Energy is invested rather than spent. Distractions lose appeal because they conflict with higher expectations. This focus is not rigid. It is intentional. It allows for rest, but not avoidance. It allows for flexibility, but not inconsistency. A better life is not created by dramatic moments. It is built through daily adherence to higher demands. Small improvements compound. Slightly better preparation, slightly more discipline, slightly higher effort, repeated over time, produce significant change. What appears to others as transformation is often the result of quiet, consistent adherence to elevated self-demands. The quality of your life will never exceed the quality of the demands you place on yourself. When those demands rise, behavior adjusts. When behavior adjusts, habits improve. When habits improve, outcomes follow. This process is reliable and repeatable. A better life is not found. It is constructed through the daily decision to expect more of yourself than you did yesterday and to honor those expectations through disciplined action that aligns with the person you are committed to becoming.